The chapel bells tolled like a funeral dirge as Millicent Harrow stood at the altar of Ravensford, her white silk gown feeling more like a burial shroud than a wedding dress. At 18, she had become the object of the congregation's barely concealed pity. "The poor orphan," Mrs. Pemberton whispered to her companion, her voice carrying in the stone chamber, "sold to a dying duke like livestock at market." "Lord Crofton," came another murmur. 72 years old, they say, ravaged by illness. She'll be a widow before the month is out." Millicent's hands trembled around her wilting bouquet, but her spine remained straight. The only inheritance her father had left her. Dignity in the face of defeat. Aunt Agatha appeared at her elbow, adjusting Millicent's veil with possessive fingers. "You will not embarrass me," she hissed into her niece's ear, her breath sour with champagne already consumed in the vestibule. "You should thank me on bended knee. A duchess, when you deserved a workhouse." The gratitude Aunt Agatha expected would never come. Millicent had learned in the 3 years since her parents' carriage accident that silence was her only weapon. Her aunt had stripped away everything else, her mother's jewelry, her father's books, even the small inheritance that should have kept her comfortable until marriage. All of it had vanished into the bottomless pit of Agatha's gambling debts. And now, Millicent herself was the final payment. My lovely family, before we continue with this story, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments section where you are watching from. The vicar cleared his throat, his jowls quivering with nervousness. His Grace, the Duke of Ravensford. The chapel fell silent. Every head turned toward the vestry door as it opened with a groan that seemed to come from the very stones of Ravensford itself. The man who emerged seemed conjured from Millicent's darkest imaginings. Thaddeus Crofton moved with the shuffling caution of someone navigating a ship's deck in a storm. Though he must have once been tall, his frame had collapsed inward, his formal coat hanging from shoulders that seemed barely able to support the weight of the ducal chain of office. His face, gaunt, colorless, mapped with the shadows of long suffering, belonged to a man already half claimed by the grave. A collective intake of breath rippled through the congregation. Lady Havisham pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Young Miss Cordelia Winthrop turned away entirely, unable to watch what came next. Millicent forced herself to look. If she was to be bound to this man, to watch him die in the coming weeks or months, the least she could do was face him without flinching. He approached with agonizing slowness, each step a visible effort. His breathing was labored, audible in the hushed chapel. Twice he paused, steadying himself against the end of a pew while an elderly manservant hovered anxiously behind him. The distance from the vestry door to the altar could not have been more than 20 paces, but it took an eternity to cross. When he finally stood beside her, Millicent could smell the sickness on him, the sweet, wrong scent of a body failing itself. Up close, she could see the yellowish tinge to his skin, the way his hands shook despite his obvious efforts to control them. The guests watched with the fascinated horror of spectators at an execution. "Miss Harrow," he said, his voice a papery whisper that barely carried beyond the first pew. "Your Grace," Millicent replied, curtsying as low as her trembling legs would allow. His hand, thin, spotted, shaking, reached for hers. But when his fingers closed around Millicent's, his grip was surprisingly firm. And in his rheumy eyes, she glimpsed something the gossips had not prepared her for. Recognition, purpose, something almost like sorrow. "Shall we begin?" the vicar asked nervously, already flipping through his prayer book as though speed might somehow make the ceremony less grotesque. "Yes," the Duke said, his gaze never leaving Millicent's face. "Let us set things right at last." The words made no sense, but Millicent had no time to parse them. The vicar was already racing through the liturgy, his voice pitched high with discomfort. Behind her, Aunt Agatha shifted impatiently, her silk skirts rustling. Millicent knew that sound. It was the rustle of a woman calculating profit. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched. Millicent felt a wild urge to speak, to object to her own wedding, to cry out that this was not matrimony, but murder. But what would she say? That she did not love him? Love was a luxury for heroines in novels, not orphans whose only other option was destitution. I require and charge you both, as you will answer at the dreadful day of judgment, when the secrets of all hearts shall be disclosed. The Duke's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on hers. Not painful, but deliberate. When Millicent dared to glance up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that belied his frailty. His lips moved, forming words too soft for anyone else to hear. "Forgive me." Before she could respond, the vicar was prompting the Duke for his vows. Thaddeus Crofton's voice, though weak, did not waver. "I, Thaddeus Edward Crofton, take thee, Millicent Charlotte Harrow, to be my wedded wife." Then it was her turn. The words stuck in her throat like stones. Around her, she could feel the weight of judgment. The pitying glances, Aunt Agatha's satisfied smile, the Duke's labored breathing. "I, Millicent Charlotte Harrow." Her voice broke. She swallowed and began again. "I, Millicent Charlotte Harrow, take thee, Thaddeus Edward Crofton, to be my wedded husband." The ring he slipped onto her finger was warm, as though he had been holding it close to his heart. Gold, heavy, ancient. The ring of the Dukes of Ravensford, binding her to a dying man and a crumbling estate. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The chapel erupted in polite applause that sounded more like the patter of rain on a coffin lid. Aunt Agatha was already moving toward the vestry, where the marriage documents waited for signatures and witnesses. This was what she had come for. The proof of transaction. The legal transfer of her niece from burden to asset. The Duke swayed slightly, and Millicent instinctively reached out to steady him. Their eyes met once more, and again she saw that strange look, gratitude mixed with something deeper. Remorse, perhaps, or determination. "Come," he whispered. "We must sign the documents. And then, my dear, we must talk." The Duke's chambers were nothing like Millicent had imagined. She had braced herself for something gothic and oppressive. Heavy velvet curtains, the cloying smell of medicine, perhaps a bath chair or invalid's table laden with tinctures and tonic bottles. Instead, she found herself in a surprisingly austere room dominated by a massive oak desk piled high with ledgers and correspondence. Bookshelves lined two walls, their volumes worn with use rather than arranged for display. A fire burned low in the grate, casting amber light across Persian rugs that had seen better decades. Thaddeus dismissed his manservant with a slight wave, then moved slowly toward a pair of wing-backed chairs positioned before the fire. The journey from door to hearth left him breathless, but he refused Millicent's instinctive offer of assistance. "Sit," he said, lowering himself into one chair with visible relief. "Please. We have much to discuss and little time for propriety." Millicent perched on the edge of the opposite chair, her wedding gown pooling around her like spilled milk. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, then. The wedding night. She thought of the whispered warnings from married women, the vague euphemisms and knowing looks. Whatever was about to happen, she would endure it with the same stoicism she had endured everything else. But the Duke made no move toward her. Instead, he reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the firelight, a silver locket, tarnished with age. "Do you recognize this?" he asked, holding it out to her. Millicent took it with trembling fingers. The locket was warm from his body heat, surprisingly heavy. She pressed the tiny clasp and it sprang open, revealing two faded photographs. On the left, a young man in military uniform, barely 20, with laughing eyes and her father's unmistakable nose. On the right, another soldier, taller and broader, with Thaddeus Crofton's high cheekbones beneath a face still unravaged by illness. "That was taken in the Crimea," Thaddeus said softly. 1854. "Your father, Lieutenant James Harrow, and myself. We were both second sons with something to prove and nothing to lose." Millicent's throat constricted. She had so few images of her father. Aunt Agatha had sold most of them, claimed the rest. This laughing young man seemed almost a stranger, yet she knew him in her bones. "He saved my life," Thaddeus continued, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Twice, actually. Once when a Russian bayonet found my shoulder, and again when fever nearly took me in the field hospital. He sat by my bedside for 3 weeks, forcing water down my throat, reading to me from whatever books he could scavenge. The doctors had already written me off." He paused, his breathing labored. Millicent waited, the locket clutched in her palm. "When we returned to England, we made a pact. We were brothers," we said, "closer than blood. Whatever fortune came to either of us, we would share. When his children came, they would be mine. When mine came, they would be his." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "But I never married. The illness, it began even then, slowly. And your father married your mother and found happiness I could only witness from afar." "He never mentioned you," Millicent whispered. "No, he wouldn't have. We quarreled, you see, the year before he died. I had urged him to leave your aunt's household, to take you and your mother away from Agatha's influence. But he was loyal to his late wife's sister, believed she deserved his protection after her own husband's death left her in reduced circumstances." Thaddeus's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "I called him a fool. He called me a meddling bachelor with no understanding of family obligations. We did not speak again." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, rain had begun to fall, pattering against the windows like urgent fingers. "When I learned of the carriage accident," Thaddeus said, his voice dropping to barely more than a rasp, "I tried to reach you. I wrote to Agatha, offered to assume guardianship. She replied that you were quite well cared for and needed nothing from me. She never told me." Millicent's voice was hollow. "Of course not. Because you were worth more to her as a pawn than as a ward. I made inquiries. Quietly at first, then more urgently as my own health declined. I learned she had gambled away your entire inheritance, that she had been approached by creditors, that she had begun entertaining offers for your hand from men who—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Men who would have used you poorly and discarded you when their interest waned." Millicent thought of Mr. Grimsby, the debt collector who had visited the house twice last month, his eyes traveling over her with the assessment of a horse trader. Aunt Agatha had laughed at something he said and refilled his brandy glass. "I could not let it happen," Thaddeus said. "I promised your father I would watch over you, and I failed him once already by letting pride keep me silent. I would not fail him again." "So you married me." The words came out flat, emotionless. Millicent felt as though she were watching this conversation from a great distance, So I married you, to give you my name, my protection, and most importantly, my estate. He leaned forward, urgency animating his wasted features. You must understand, Millicent. This is not a marriage in truth. I have no intentions, that is, I would never presume. He struggled for words, color rising in his pale cheeks. I am dying. The physicians give me weeks, perhaps months if I am unlucky. But as my Duchess, as my legal heir, everything I possess becomes yours. The estate, the investments, the title's protections. Agatha will have no claim on you. No man can touch you without your consent. You will be free. The locket seemed to pulse with heat in Millicent's hand. She looked down at the two young soldiers, frozen forever in their moment of brotherhood and hope. You married me to save me, she said slowly. I married you to honor a debt to the finest man I ever knew. Thaddeus sagged back in his chair, the burst of energy draining from him like water from a cracked vessel. And to thwart the greed of a woman who would sell her own blood for a winning hand at cards. Millicent rose from her chair and moved to kneel beside him. Up close, she could see the effort it cost him to remain conscious. The tremor in his limbs, the sallow tint to his skin. This man had used his dying strength to rescue her. Then I have a debt too, she said firmly, and I intend to repay it. His eyes met hers, confused. There is no debt. You owe me nothing. You gave me your name and your fortune, Millicent said. I give you my word. I will not let you die. Morning light filtered through the mullioned windows of Ravensford as Millicent descended the grand staircase, still wearing yesterday's traveling dress. She had spent the night in the Duchess's chambers, a vast suite that smelled of lavender and disuse, while Thaddeus had been helped to bed by his manservant shortly after their conversation. The household had retired early, leaving the new Duchess to navigate the silent corridors alone. Now, in the gray dawn, the estate revealed itself properly. Ravensford was larger than she had realized, a sprawling Renaissance manor that had absorbed additions over centuries like a tree growing new rings. Portraits of stern-faced Croftons lined the walls, their eyes following her progress through rooms filled with furniture draped in Holland covers. Dust motes danced in the thin sunlight. The air tasted of old wood and older secrets. She found the kitchens first, where a startled cook named Mrs. Brennan hastily prepared tea and toast, apologizing profusely for not having breakfast ready. We didn't know your Grace's preferences, she stammered, bobbing curtsies. His Grace, he eats so little now, barely a bite of porridge most mornings. Millicent accepted the tea gratefully and asked about the household's routine. Mrs. Brennan seemed relieved to have direction, explaining that most of the staff had been let go over the past 2 years as the Duke's illness progressed. Now, only 5 remained. Herself, the manservant Grimshaw, a housemaid, a groom, and an ancient groundskeeper who was nearly as deaf as stone. The Duke wouldn't hear of dismissing us, Mrs. Brennan said, her eyes misting, even when the steward said it was financially prudent. They are family, he said. We keep family. After breakfast, Millicent continued her exploration. The morning room, the conservatory with its collection of withered exotic plants, the ballroom that clearly hadn't hosted a dance in decades. Each space whispered of former grandeur now fading into genteel neglect. It was not poverty. The furnishings were quality. The grounds still maintained. But rather the exhaustion of a household holding vigil over a dying master. She found the library by accident, opening what she thought was a linen closet, only to discover a narrow servant's stair that spiraled upward. Following it on impulse, she emerged into a circular tower room lined floor to ceiling with books. Her breath caught. Here, finally, was warmth. A fire had been laid, but not lit. The chairs showed wear from actual use. Books lay open on side tables, marked with strips of ribbon. This was a room that had been loved. And there, on a desk positioned to catch the eastern light, sat a wooden box she recognized immediately. Her hands shook as she crossed to it. The box was rosewood, inlaid with mother-of-pearl in a pattern of vines and flowers. Her father had kept it on his desk in the study of their old house. She had played with it as a child, fascinated by the way the pearl caught the light. After his death, Aunt Agatha had claimed it was lost. The lid opened smoothly, well-oiled hinges making no sound. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with string, their paper yellowed and soft with age. Millicent lifted the first bundle with reverent care and untied it. "My dear Thaddeus." The top letter began in her father's familiar script. "I write to you from the most extraordinary happiness. Catherine has agreed to marry me. Can you believe it? Plain James Harrow has won the hand of the most remarkable woman in 3 counties." Millicent sank into the desk chair, her eyes devouring the words. The letter went on to describe her mother, her wit, her kindness, her ability to quote Virgil while also managing a household account book. Her father's joy radiated from every line, his excitement almost boyish as he begged Thaddeus to attend the wedding, to stand as his witness. She reached for the next letter, then the next. Years of correspondence unfolded before her. Her father writing of her own birth. "She has your eyes, Thaddeus, that same piercing gray." Catherine laughs and says we must keep close watch on her, for she will see through every deception. Letters about her childhood illnesses, her first words, her stubborn insistence on learning to ride astride rather than side saddle. And Thaddeus's responses, in a bolder hand, were tucked between her father's letters. Congratulations on the birth. Advice about childhood fevers. A gentle ribbing about James's overprotectiveness. She will grow stronger if you let her fall occasionally, old friend. Trust her resilience. But as the correspondence continued, a new thread emerged. Concern. Thaddeus writing about Agatha's influence, her gambling, her manipulation of Catherine's gentle nature, her father's responses growing defensive, then frustrated. "You do not understand the obligations of family," her father had written in one particularly heated letter. "Agatha lost everything when Reginald died. Would you have me turn her out? She is my wife's only sister. I would have you protect your daughter from her," Thaddeus had replied. "I have made inquiries, James. The debts are worse than you know. She will drag you all down with her unless you act." "You overstep," her father had written back. "I thank you for your concern, but this is my family to manage, not yours." The letters stopped there. The dates showed nearly 2 years before her father's death. 2 years of silence between the closest of friends. Millicent found herself crying without quite knowing when the tears had started. They fell onto the old paper, and she hastily blotted them away with her sleeve, terrified of damaging these precious remnants. Her father had been warned. He had known about Agatha's debts, her schemes, and he had chosen loyalty over prudence, family obligation over wisdom. It had killed him. Perhaps not literally. The carriage accident had been genuine, a wheel breaking on a rain-slicked road. But it had placed him on that road at that moment, driving too fast to reach a meeting with one of Agatha's creditors. "He saw you, you know, in your father." Millicent startled, turning to find Grimshaw standing in the doorway, a tea tray in his gnarled hands. The old manservant moved into the room with the confidence of long familiarity. "Begging your grace's pardon for the intrusion," he said, setting the tray on a side table. But the Duke mentioned you might find your way here. Said you had your father's curiosity. Did you know him? My father? Met him once, when he visited after his wedding. Bright young man, full of plans and hopes. The Duke was never the same after their falling out. Blamed himself terrible when the news came about the accident. Grimshaw moved to the fireplace and lit the waiting kindling with practiced efficiency. He's been collecting those letters for years, Your Grace. Every time he thought to write, to mend the breach. But pride's a fierce enemy, fiercer even than the illness. The fire caught, spreading warmth through the circular room. Millicent wiped her eyes and looked around with new understanding. This wasn't just a library. It was a shrine to friendship, to love that had survived death and regret. He means to make it right, Grimshaw said softly. The only way he can now. By saving me. By honoring the man who saved him first. The old servant bowed slightly. If Your Grace requires anything, you need only ring. After he left, Millicent sat in the growing firelight, her father's letters spread before her like a map to a country she had never known existed. A place where she had been loved not just by parents, but by a guardian who had watched from afar, waiting for his chance to make good on an old promise. She would not let that chance go to waste. The crisis came 3 days after the wedding, announced by Grimshaw's urgent knock at dawn. Millicent threw on a dressing gown and rushed to the Duke's chambers to find Thaddeus unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin clammy to the touch. The room reeked of something sweet and wrong, like fruit left too long in the sun. Grimshaw hovered at the bedside, his weathered face gray with fear. He won't wake, Your Grace. I've tried everything. Water, salts, even a bit of brandy. He just lies there, burning up one moment and cold as death the next. Millicent pressed her hand to Thaddeus's forehead. His skin was furnace hot, yet he shivered beneath the blankets. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words in some fever dream she couldn't access. Send for the physician, she commanded. Immediately. Already done, Your Grace. He should arrive within the hour. But Dr. Whitmore, when he finally appeared, offered nothing but platitudes and a slow shake of his head. He was an elderly man with spectacles that perched precariously on a bulbous nose, and he examined Thaddeus with the resigned air of an undertaker measuring for a coffin. The diabetes has progressed beyond treatment, he pronounced, snapping his medical bag shut. I have been managing His Grace's condition for 2 years now, and I'm afraid we have reached the inevitable conclusion. Keep him comfortable. Laudanum for the pain. I give him 48 hours at most. 48 hours? Millicent's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. Surely there must be something, a treatment, a specialist. My dear Duchess, I understand this is distressing, but you must accept the reality. The Duke's constitution is exhausted. His body is shutting down. The kindest thing now is to let nature take its course. Dr. Whitmore's tone was not unkind, but it carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. I shall return this evening to check on him. In the meantime, you may wish to send for family, for the will reading and such. He left, and Millicent stood frozen in the sick room, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. 48 hours. 3 days of marriage, and she would be a widow. Thaddeus would die without seeing his sacrifice bear fruit, without knowing if his intervention had truly saved her. She would not accept it. But before she could formulate a plan, the vultures arrived. They came in a hired carriage, announced by the crunch of wheels on gravel. Millicent watched from the window as 3 figures emerged. A portly man in an expensive but ill-fitting coat. A thin woman whose face looked as though she had been weaned on vinegar, and trailing behind them, resplendent in black silk despite the lack of any actual death, Aunt Agatha. The Duke's cousins, Grimshaw informed her quietly, appearing at her elbow. Mr. Percival Crofton and his sister, Miss Letitia. They are His Grace's closest living relatives after yourself. He never mentioned them. No, they never visited when he was well. But news of a dying duke travels fast in certain circles. Millicent descended to the drawing room where the visitors had been installed. Percival Crofton rose as she entered, his bow perfunctory and his eyes already cataloging the furnishings with an appraiser's attention. "My dear Duchess," he said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "What a tragedy to be called here under such circumstances. We came as soon as we heard of dear Thaddeus's decline." "How considerate," Millicent replied, her tone glacial. "Though I'm afraid the Duke is resting and cannot receive visitors." "Oh, we wouldn't dream of disturbing him," Letitia said, her sharp eyes darting around the room. "We merely wish to offer our support in this difficult time, and of course, to ensure that dear Cousin Thaddeus has everything he needs." Aunt Agatha, positioned by the fireplace like a spider in her web, smiled. How fortunate that family can gather in these final hours. "Millicent, dear, you look exhausted. Perhaps these good people might assist you with the necessary arrangements." "Arrangements?" Millicent kept her voice level through sheer force of will. "For the funeral, naturally," Percival said, his tone unctuous, "and the estate matters that will follow. These things are complex, and you are so young, so inexperienced. We would hate to see you burdened with decisions beyond your understanding." The implication was clear. They expected her to step aside, to defer to older and supposedly wiser heads, to let them manage the duchy that would, in the absence of direct heirs, pass to Percival as the nearest male relative. "I appreciate your concern," Millicent said, each word sharp as a blade. "But the Duke's affairs are well in hand. I will send word if your presence is required." "Now, see here," Percival began, his facade of sympathy cracking. "I believe the Duchess has made herself clear," Grimshaw interrupted from the doorway, his elderly frame somehow commanding despite his years. "Shall I show you out?" Letitia rose, her face pinched with offense. "We have traveled a great distance to be here. Surely you don't mean to turn us away from our own cousin's deathbed?" "I mean to protect my husband's peace," Millicent said. "You may take rooms at the village inn if you wish to remain nearby. I will inform you of any changes in His Grace's condition." Aunt Agatha glided forward, her expression a mask of wounded concern. "Millicent, darling, there's no need for hostility. We are all family here. Mr. Crofton merely wishes to ensure that you are not overwhelmed by responsibilities you cannot possibly manage alone." "I am not alone." Millicent met her aunt's eyes directly, drawing strength from the anger that burned beneath her carefully maintained composure. "I am the Duchess of Ravensford, and this is my household to manage." "For now," Percival muttered, adjusting his coat. "We shall see what the will reveals." They departed in a flurry of affronted dignity, Aunt Agatha lingering at the door to deliver one final poisonous smile. "Do try not to tire yourself with nursing duties, dear. You wouldn't want to compromise your health just as you're about to enter a period of mourning." When they were gone, Millicent sagged against the mantelpiece, her hands shaking. Through the window she watched the carriage roll toward the village, carrying its cargo of greed and calculation. "They'll be back," Grimshaw said quietly. "I know. The Duke changed his will the day before the wedding, left everything to you, free and clear. They'll contest it if they can." Millicent straightened, forcing steel back into her spine. Then we ensure they cannot. Grimshaw, I need you to send for someone. Not Dr. Whitmore, someone else. Someone who actually knows how to treat diabetes rather than simply waiting for patients to die. Your Grace, the nearest specialist would be in London. It would take days. Yeah. Then send a telegram. Offer double his usual fee, triple it if necessary. She turned to face the old servant, her jaw set. 48 hours, Doctor, Whitmore said. Very well. We have 48 hours to prove him wrong. Grimshaw's weathered face broke into the ghost of a smile. Your father would be proud, Your Grace. My father trusted the wrong people and died for it, Millicent said. I will not make the same mistake. She climbed the stairs back to Thaddeus's chamber, where he lay lost in fevered dreams, his breathing labored and irregular. She pulled a chair to his bedside and took his burning hand in hers. You saved me, she whispered. Now let me save you. The breaking point came on the 5th morning, when Millicent entered Thaddeus's chamber to find Dr. Whitmore preparing to bleed him again. The physician had arrived unannounced, accompanied by Aunt Agatha and a younger doctor Millicent had never seen before. A nervous man with ink-stained fingers who introduced himself as Dr. Pettigrew, recently arrived from the village to assist with the case. What are you doing? Millicent demanded, staring at the brass bleeding bowl already positioned beneath Thaddeus's limp arm. The treatment protocol, Your Grace, Dr. Whitmore replied without looking up. He was rolling up the Duke's sleeve, exposing skin so pale it appeared nearly translucent. The humors must be balanced. The blood is clearly corrupted. You can smell the sweetness of it. We must drain the impurities before they poison his vital organs entirely. Thaddeus lay motionless, his breathing shallow and rapid. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, and the sweet fruit rot smell that Dr. Whitmore mentioned hung over the bed like a shroud. In the past 2 days, he had worsened dramatically, despite, or perhaps because of, the physician's interventions. You bled him yesterday, Millicent said, her voice tight. And the day before that. The condition requires aggressive treatment, Dr. Pettigrew interjected, consulting a leather-bound notebook. Dr. Whitmore has been most generous in sharing his protocols with me. In addition to the bleeding, we've been administering strengthening tonics, beef broth thickened with white bread, and port wine fortified with honey to restore his vitality. Port wine with honey. For a man whose body could not process sugar. Millicent felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Stop, she said. Dr. Whitmore finally looked up, his expression one of patronizing patience. My dear Duchess, I understand your distress, but you must trust those with medical expertise. The Duke's condition is grave precisely because it has been allowed to progress untreated for so long. We are doing everything in our power. You're killing him. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Aunt Agatha, who had been standing near the window in an attitude of concerned observation, turned sharply. Millicent, really? These gentlemen are trained physicians. You cannot possibly. I can, and I do. Millicent moved to the bedside, placing herself physically between Thaddeus and the doctors. You will not bleed him again. You will not give him any more of your strengthening tonics. You will leave this room immediately. Dr. Whitmore's face darkened. Your Grace, you are overwrought. Perhaps you should rest while I am the Duchess of Ravensford, and this is my household. Millicent's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. I am also the Duke's wife, which gives me final say over his medical care. You are dismissed. This is madness, Dr. Pettigrew sputtered. "The Duke requires constant medical supervision. Without proper treatment, he will certainly die. With your treatment, he is dying already. At least give me the chance to try something different." Aunt Agatha glided forward, her expression a calculated mix of sympathy and steel. "Darling, I know you're frightened, but you cannot simply dismiss qualified physicians because their methods seem harsh. Dr. Whitmore has been managing the Duke's care for years, and in those years he has grown progressively worse." Millicent turned to face her aunt directly. "Which makes me wonder, Aunt Agatha, why you are so insistent that these particular doctors continue their treatment. What possible interest could you have in the Duke's medical care?" The silence that followed was brittle with unspoken accusations. Aunt Agatha's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "I have only your best interests at heart," she said finally. "But if you insist on this foolishness, I cannot stop you. Gentlemen, perhaps we should allow the Duchess to learn from her mistakes." After they left, Millicent sank into the bedside chair, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. She had just banished the Duke's physicians and effectively declared war on her aunt. If Thaddeus died now, she would be blamed entirely. But when she looked at his wasted form, at the bluish tinge to his lips and the way his chest struggled for each breath, she knew she had made the right choice. Whatever the local doctors were doing was not medicine. It was a slow execution. She spent the next hour searching Thaddeus's study, driven by instinct more than plan. If he had known about diabetes, if he had been managing it for years, surely he must have researched it, sought information beyond what the local physicians offered. She found the evidence in a locked drawer, dozens of letters, all recent, all intercepted before they could reach Thaddeus. Letters from physicians in London and Edinburgh, responding to inquiries about new treatments. Letters from medical societies, invitations to consultations. And most damning of all, a letter from a Dr. Etienne Marot of London, dated 3 months earlier. "Your Grace, I am encouraged by your interest in the metabolic approach to diabetes mellitus. The dietary protocols I have developed show remarkable promise in reducing the symptoms and extending the lives of patients previously thought beyond help. I would be honored to consult on your case. The fee is substantial, I warn you. But if you are willing to commit to the strict regimen required, I believe we might achieve results that will astonish the medical establishment." All the letters bore the same forwarding mark, redirected through Aunt Agatha's solicitor in London. She had been intercepting Thaddeus's mail, preventing him from seeking the very help that might have saved him. Millicent returned to the sick room with new purpose. She wrote 2 telegrams, one to Dr. Marot in London, offering triple his usual consultation fee for immediate attendance, and one to her late father's former solicitor, requesting copies of all legal documents pertaining to her rights as the Duke's wife. The responses came with surprising speed. Dr. Marot would arrive within 2 days, and the solicitor confirmed what she had suspected. As Thaddeus's legal wife, she had absolute authority over his medical care, his household, and, in his current incapacitated state, his business affairs. Armed with this knowledge, Millicent began her preparations. Dr. Etienne Marot arrived on a drizzling Tuesday afternoon, stepping from his hired carriage like a man accustomed to walking into hostile situations. He was younger than Millicent had expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He carried a battered leather medical bag and an air of absolute certainty. Aunt Agatha intercepted him in the entrance hall. "I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice honey-sweet with false regret. "The Duke is under the care of his longtime physician, Dr. Whitmore. We do not require additional consultation." Dr. Morrow raised an eyebrow. And you are? Lady Agatha Harrow, the Duchess's aunt and guardian. I see. And where is the Duchess? I speak for the Duchess in matters. You do not. Millicent descended the stairs, the marriage contract and legal documents in hand. She had dressed carefully in a severe black dress that emphasized her new status as Duchess. Her hair was pulled back in a style that added years to her face. Dr. Morrow, welcome to Ravensford. I am the one who sent for you. She turned to her aunt. Lady Agatha, you are no longer my guardian. I am a married woman and the Duchess of this estate. You have no authority here. Agatha's face flushed with rage. You ungrateful little. I also know that you have been intercepting the Duke's correspondence. Millicent's voice remained calm, but her eyes were hard. Preventing him from seeking medical help that might have saved his life months ago. I have the evidence, and I have consulted with a solicitor. If you interfere with Dr. Morrow's treatment of my husband, I will pursue legal action for fraud and conspiracy. You wouldn't dare. Try me. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, Aunt Agatha swept toward the door, her silk skirts hissing against the marble floor. This isn't over, she said. We shall see what the courts have to say about a child playing at being a duchess. When she was gone, Dr. Morrow allowed himself a small smile. Well, that was illuminating. Shall we see the patient? His examination of Thaddeus was thorough and, to Millicent's eyes, shockingly different from Dr. Whitmore's cursory assessments. He smelled the Duke's breath, tested his urine with chemical papers that changed color, measured his pulse at different points, and asked Grimshaw detailed questions about diet, habits, and the progression of symptoms. Diabetic ketoacidosis, he pronounced finally. Advanced, but not necessarily fatal if we act immediately. Your Grace, I must be blunt. Everything the local physicians have been doing is precisely wrong. The bleeding weakens him further. The sweet tonics and white bread are poison to a diabetic body. They might as well have been feeding him arsenic. Can you save him? Dr. Morrow met her eyes. I can give him a chance, but it will require a complete transformation of his diet and lifestyle, and the treatment will seem harsh to those who don't understand the science. Your aunt will certainly use it against you. She will claim you are starving him, denying him proper nutrition. Are you prepared for that fight? I am. Good. Then we begin immediately. The first step was the purge. Dr. Morrow personally supervised the kitchen, ordering the removal of all bread, potatoes, sugar, and ale. Mrs. Brennan watched in horror as staples of the English diet were carried out and distributed to the village poor. But what will we feed His Grace? She asked, wringing her hands. The poor man needs his strength. He needs protein and fat, not carbohydrates, Dr. Morrow explained. The body of a diabetic cannot process starches and sugars properly. They accumulate in the blood, poisoning the organs. We must eliminate them entirely. He introduced what he called the Rollo Protocol, named after a Scottish physician who had pioneered dietary treatment of diabetes decades earlier. Thaddeus's meals would consist of lean game meats, venison, partridge, rabbit, prepared simply with herbs, but no flour-based sauces. Bone broths rich with marrow. Leafy greens, particularly the bitter varieties. Kale, dandelion, mustard greens. Eggs. Cheese in moderation. And absolutely nothing sweet, nothing white, nothing made from grain. Millicent took charge of the kitchen personally, learning to prepare the meals under Dr. Morrow's exacting supervision. It was strange work for a duchess. but she found a peculiar satisfaction in it. The precise measurement of portions, the careful selection of ingredients, the knowledge that she was fighting for Thaddeus's life with every meal. But diet alone was not enough. Dr. Morrow had brought with him an apothecary's collection of herbs and botanicals, some familiar, others exotic. The bitter tonic, he explained, showing Millicent how to prepare it. This is where the real medicine happens. The primary ingredient was fenugreek seed, which had to be soaked overnight in cold water until it released a thick, mucilaginous liquid. The ancients knew this plant reduced the sweetness in a diabetic's urine, Dr. Morrow said. We now understand it slows the absorption of glucose in the gut. A spoonful 3 times daily before meals. To this base they added powdered cinnamon bark, not the sweet spice used in pastries, but true Ceylon cinnamon, bitter and medicinal. It stimulates what I call blood warmth, Dr. Morrow explained. The body's ability to process what it consumes rather than simply storing it as poison. The third ingredient arrived in a specially packed crate from London. Bitter melon, also called balsam pear, a grotesque-looking gourd covered in warty protuberances. Dr. Morrow handled it with reverence. This is the key, he said. In the East Indies, they've used it for centuries to treat the pissing evil. My colleagues mock me for trusting savage medicine, but I've seen it work. The bitter melon contains compounds that act almost like plant insulin. They help the body move sugar from the blood into the cells where it can be used. Preparing the tonic became Millicent's ritual. Each morning before dawn, she would grind the fenugreek seeds, steep the cinnamon, and juice the bitter melon, a process that filled the kitchen with an astringent smell that made Mrs. Brennan wrinkle her nose. The resulting liquid was dark brown and tasted, Millicent discovered when she tested it herself, absolutely vile. But Thaddeus drank it without complaint, whenever he was conscious enough to swallow. The first few days showed no improvement. If anything, Thaddeus seemed to worsen, as Dr. Morrow had warned he might. The body is purging the accumulated toxins, he explained. It will get worse before it gets better. We must hold the course. Millicent held the course, even when Thaddeus's fever spiked, even when he thrashed in delirium, calling out for her father, reliving battles from the Crimea. She sat by his bedside through the long nights, spooning the bitter tonic into his mouth, bathing his forehead with cool cloths, and refusing to let Dr. Whitmore back into the house when he appeared with legal threats. On the 7th day, something changed. Thaddeus's constant, desperate thirst, the symptom that had plagued him for months, began to subside. He stopped gasping for water every few minutes. The sweet, rotten smell that had hung over his bed like a death shroud began to dissipate, replaced by the more ordinary sense of illness and human frailty. On the 10th day, he opened his eyes and they were clear. "Millicent," he whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. She nearly dropped the cup of tonic she was holding. "You're awake. Truly awake. What have you been feeding me?" A ghost of humor flickered across his wasted face. "It tastes like the devil's own brew." "Medicine. Real medicine, not Dr. Whitmore's nonsense." He tried to sit up and managed only to raise his head a few inches before exhaustion claimed him again. But those few inches were more movement than he had managed in 2 weeks. "The letters," he said. "In my study. Did you find them?" "I did. And I sent for Dr. Morrow, just as you wanted 2 months ago. Agatha will be furious. Agatha can rot in hell." That drew a weak laugh from him. "Your father would be scandalized by your language." "My father would be proud I'm fighting for you." She helped him drink a few sips of bone broth, marveling at the way his hands, though still trembling, had regained some small measure of strength. "Rest now. You're going to recover. I won't allow otherwise." Over the next week, the improvements continued. Thaddeus's color improved from corpse gray to merely pale. His breathing steadied. He could sit up for short periods, could hold conversations that made sense, could even read a few pages before exhaustion claimed him. Dr. Morrow was cautiously optimistic. "I've never seen a case this advanced respond so well," he admitted to Millicent. "Your dedication to the protocol has been flawless. And frankly, I suspect the Duke's survival instinct is stronger than his body has any right to support. He has something to live for." "Someone saved him," Millicent said. "It would be rude to die before he could thank her properly." On the 15th day of treatment, Thaddeus managed to walk from his bed to the chair by the window, a journey of perhaps 10 feet that left him breathless and shaking, but undeniably triumphant. He sat in the weak autumn sunlight, a blanket around his shoulders, and looked at Millicent with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You are extraordinary," he said finally. "I married you to protect you, but you have become my protector instead." "We protect each other," Millicent replied. "That's what family does." It was in this moment of hard-won peace that the knock came at the door. Grimshaw appeared, his face grave. "Your Grace, Lady Agatha is here, with a gentleman from London, a lawyer and a magistrate. They are demanding to see both you and the Duke immediately. They have papers." Millicent's blood ran cold. "What kind of papers?" "A petition for competency hearing, Your Grace. They claim you are starving the Duke to death to inherit his fortune. They mean to remove you as his guardian and place the estate under court supervision." Thaddeus reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. "Let them come," he said. "Let them see that I am not dead yet, and let them face the Duchess of Ravensford at the height of her power." Millicent squeezed his hand and turned toward the door, steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. The battle was far from over, but she had already won the most important fight. She had brought Thaddeus back from the edge of death. Now, she would ensure that no one could take that victory away. The confrontation happened in the Grand Hall, beneath the stern gaze of 12 generations of Croftons whose portraits lined the walls. Aunt Agatha swept in like an avenging angel, her black silk rustling with righteous indignation, flanked by a thin man in legal robes and a jowly magistrate who looked profoundly uncomfortable with his errand. "There she is," Agatha announced, pointing at Millicent with a trembling finger. "The girl who has held my dear cousin-in-law prisoner in his own home, denying him proper medical care and Christian comfort in his final hours." Millicent stood at the base of the staircase, Dr. Morrow at her right and Grimshaw at her left. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, a deep burgundy gown that proclaimed her status as Duchess, while avoiding the premature mourning black that Agatha clearly expected her to be wearing. "Magistrate Holbrook," she said, ignoring her aunt entirely and addressing the uncomfortable official directly. "I am surprised to see you here without prior notice. Surely any legal matter concerning the Duke of Ravensford warrants more formal proceedings?" Holbrook cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I apologize for the irregular nature of this visit. However, Lady Agatha has presented serious allegations that required immediate investigation. She claims the Duke is being denied access to his own physicians, held incommunicado, and subjected to dangerous experimental treatments against his will." "Starved," Agatha interjected. "She's starving him, denying him bread and proper English food. I have witnesses. Dr. Whitmore will testify that she dismissed him from the case and brought in this foreign charlatan with his savage remedies." Dr. Morrow raised an eyebrow. "I am from London, madam, not Borneo." "You know what I mean," Agatha snapped. You've filled the Duke's head with dangerous nonsense about diet and herbs, while he wastes away to nothing. I demand to see him immediately. I demand to verify his condition with my own eyes. And I demand, the lawyer spoke up for the first time, his voice reedy and officious, to examine the Duke's most recent will and testament. There are questions about its legitimacy, given His Grace's diminished mental state at the time of its execution. So that was it. They had come for the will, hoping to find Thaddeus too weak to defend it, perhaps even dead already. Millicent felt cold rage settle in her stomach like a stone. "The Duke is resting," she said evenly. "He has been gravely ill, as you well know. I will not have him disturbed by a circus of accusers." "The law requires," the lawyer began. "The law requires nothing of the sort," Dr. Marrow interrupted. "I am the Duke's attending physician, and I declare him unfit for visitors at this time. Any attempt to force entry to his chambers would constitute assault on a vulnerable patient." Agatha's mask of concern slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "You cannot keep us from him forever. I am his family. I have rights." "You have no rights in this household," Millicent said. "You are not blood relation to the Duke, merely the sister of my late mother. Your only connection to this estate is through me, and I am ordering you to leave." "I will not leave until I see Thaddeus and verify that he is being properly cared for." Agatha's voice rose, echoing off the marble floors. "And I will see that will. I know what you've done. Wormed your way into a dying man's confidence. Convinced him to leave everything to you when there are legitimate heirs who deserve—" "Legitimate heirs?" Millicent's voice cracked like a whip. "You mean Mr. Percival Crofton, who never visited the Duke once in 2 years of illness? Who only appeared at Ravensford when he smelled death in the air like a vulture circling carrion?" Magistrate Holbrook shifted uncomfortably. "Your Grace, perhaps if we could simply verify the Duke's condition, this matter could be resolved peacefully." "No." The word rang out with absolute finality. Millicent descended 2 steps, using the height advantage to full effect. "You will not see him. You will not disturb his rest. And you will absolutely not examine private legal documents without proper court order." "I have a court order," the lawyer said smugly, producing a folded document from his coat. "Signed by Judge Eldridge this very morning, authorizing inspection of the estate and its records pending investigation of alleged elder abuse and mental incompetence." Millicent's heart lurched, but she kept her expression neutral. "Then Judge Eldridge exceeded his authority. The Duke is lucid and recovering under proper medical care. Any claims of incompetence are slander." "Prove it," Agatha challenged. "Bring him down here. Let us see this miraculous recovery you claim." It was a trap, and Millicent knew it. Thaddeus was stronger than he had been, yes, but still a shadow of health. If they saw him now, gaunt, trembling, barely able to walk unaided, they would use his appearance as evidence that their accusations were true. But before she could respond, a voice came from the top of the stairs. "There will be no need for dramatics." Every head turned. Thaddeus Crofton stood at the landing, one hand gripping the banister for support, the other steadied by a walking stick. He was dressed in a morning coat that hung loosely on his frame, his face pale but his eyes blazing with the same fierce determination Millicent had seen in their wedding night conversation. "Your Grace, you shouldn't be out of bed," Dr. Moreau said, starting toward the stairs. "I am exactly where I need to be." Thaddeus began his descent, each step careful but deliberate. The silence in the hall was absolute, except for the tap of his walking stick against marble. It took him nearly a minute to reach the bottom, and by the time he did, a fine sheen of sweat covered his forehead. But he stood upright, facing Agatha and her legal entourage with the bearing of a duke. "Lady Agatha," he said, his voice stronger than Millicent had heard it in weeks. "I am told you have questions about my mental competence and my wife's treatment of me." Agatha's expression flickered between triumph at seeing his weakened state and uncertainty at his unexpected appearance. "Thaddeus, dear cousin, we are simply concerned for your welfare. Surely you can see that this girl, the Duchess of Ravensford," Thaddeus corrected sharply, "my wife. And the only reason I am standing here today rather than lying in my tomb." He gestured to Dr. Marrow. "This physician has accomplished in 2 weeks what Dr. Whitmore failed to do in 2 years. He has given me hope of survival. My wife has enforced a medical regimen that is difficult, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary. She has fought for my life when others," his gaze swept over Agatha with withering contempt, "were already measuring my corpse for the funeral shroud. But the will," the lawyer sputtered, "was executed when I was of sound mind and remains valid." Thaddeus's hand trembled on his walking stick, but his voice remained steady. "I have left my estate to my wife because she is the only person in this world I trust to honor my wishes and preserve what my family built over centuries. Now, I believe I asked you to leave." Magistrate Holbrook seized the escape route gratefully. "Your Grace, I am satisfied that you are lucid and able to make your own decisions. Lady Agatha, I believe this matter is concluded." "It is not concluded," Agatha hissed. "I will contest this will. I will bring testimony about undue influence, about a scheming orphan who manipulated a sick old man." "Then bring it to court," Millicent said coldly. "And I will bring evidence of your interception of the Duke's mail, your attempts to prevent him from seeking proper medical care, and your conspiracy to allow him to die so that your preferred heir could inherit. We will let the law decide who acted with honor and who acted with greed." Agatha opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on her heel and stalked toward the door. The lawyer and magistrate followed, the former muttering darkly about appeals and irregularities. When the great door slammed behind them, Thaddeus swayed. Millicent and Dr. Marrow caught him before he could fall, easing him into a chair that Grimshaw hurriedly positioned. "That," Thaddeus said breathlessly, "was perhaps unwise from a medical standpoint." "Spectacularly unwise," Dr. Marrow agreed. "Your heart rate is dangerously elevated." "But dramatically effective," Grimshaw added with the ghost of a smile. Thaddeus looked up at Millicent, who still had one hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Did we win?" "We won this battle," she said. "But she'll be back with lawyers and witnesses and whatever lies she can purchase. This is far from over. Then we shall face it together." He covered her hand with his own, the gesture weak but sincere. "My formidable Duchess." As Dr. Marrow fussed over Thaddeus's pulse and Grimshaw went to ensure the doors were properly locked against future intrusions, Millicent allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Agatha had been turned away. The will remained secure. And Thaddeus had stood, literally stood, in defense of their partnership. But as she helped him back toward his chambers, she couldn't shake the cold certainty that her aunt's parting threat was not an empty one. The next attack would come with more preparation, more legal weight, more determination to tear apart everything they had built. Let it come, Millicent thought fiercely. She had saved a dying man's life. She could certainly save his legacy. The relapse came 3 days after the confrontation, as Dr. Marrow had grimly predicted it might. The exertion of descending the stairs, of standing against Agatha's assault, had depleted Thaddeus's fragile reserves. The fever returned with vengeance, burning through him like wildfire through dry timber. Millicent kept vigil in the chair beside his bed, a basin of cool water and cloths at hand, the bitter tonic measured and ready. Outside, a storm lashed against Ravensford's windows, rain drumming in a regular rhythm that seemed to echo Thaddeus's labored breathing. "Too hot," he muttered, thrashing against the sheets. "The sun in the Crimea, James. Tell them to bring water. The men are dying of thirst." "Hush," Millicent soothed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You're at Ravensford. You're safe." But he was already gone, lost in memories 40 years old and more vivid than the present. His eyes, when they opened, looked through her to something she couldn't see. "James, they're coming over the ridge. Russian cavalry. Get down, you fool, get down!" His hands shot out, grasping at empty air as though pulling someone to safety. The violence of the movement nearly toppled him from the bed. Millicent caught him, easing him back against the pillows. His skin was furnace hot beneath her hands, his pulse racing like a frightened bird's. She had seen fever dreams before, had nursed her mother through the influenza that weakened her heart before the carriage accident. But never anything this intense, this consuming. "The snow came early that year," Thaddeus said, his voice suddenly conversational, as though speaking to someone sitting across from him at dinner. "You remember, James? October, and already the ground was frozen. The wounded screaming because we couldn't dig graves deep enough. You said we should write about it, bear witness so that England would know what we paid for their empire." His hand reached out again, and this time Millicent took it, holding tight. "We never wrote it down, did we?" Thaddeus's eyes focused on her face, but she knew he saw her father's features instead. Too busy trying to forget, coming home and pretending we were the same men who left. But we weren't. We were ghosts wearing our old skins. "You survived," Millicent whispered. "Both of you survived." "Did we?" A terrible sadness filled his expression. "Sometimes I think we died on that ridge, and everything since has been the dream. This can't be real. You marrying Catherine, finding happiness while I rotted in this moldering estate. That's too cruel even for God's sense of humor." The storm intensified, lightning illuminating the room in stark flashes. Thunder followed, and Thaddeus flinched with each crack as though it were cannon fire. "Tell me about her again," he pleaded. "Catherine, tell me she's real, that there's still beauty in the world after what we've seen." Millicent's throat tightened. She thought of her mother, gentle, laughing, the light of her father's world. Gone now, like so much else. "She's real," she said softly. "And she loved you. You were family to her, part of James's life she treasured." "I should have visited more," Thaddeus said, tears sliding down his temples into his gray hair. "Should have been there when the baby came. But I was afraid, James. Afraid that if I saw your happiness too closely, I would hate you for having what I could never claim." He turned his head restlessly on the pillow, his breathing ragged. The illness was already starting then. The endless thirst, the weakness. I knew I was broken, that I would never give a woman children, never build the life you built. So I stayed away and nursed my bitterness like a wound I couldn't let heal. "You weren't bitter," Millicent said, though she had no way of knowing if it was true. "You were protecting yourself. That's not a sin, isn't it? I wasted years we could have spent together because of pride. And then I insulted you, called you a fool for trusting Agatha, and you were too proud to forgive me. We were both fools, James. Stubborn, stupid fools who let time slip away like water through our fingers. His grip on her hand tightened painfully. Tell me you forgive me. Please. I can't die with this weight. I forgive you, Millicent said, her voice breaking. Of course I forgive you. The tension in his body eased slightly. His breathing, though still labored, slowed from its frantic pace. Outside, the storm began to subside, the thunder retreating into distance. The little girl, Thaddeus murmured. Millicent? Is she safe? You must promise me, James. If anything happens to you, I'll watch over her. I'll be the uncle she deserves, the guardian her father would want. Promise you'll let me make amends. I promise, Millicent whispered, tears streaming down her face. She's safe. You kept your promise. You saved her. Did I? His eyes opened, and for a moment they were clear, focused on her face with sudden recognition. Millicent? Is that you? Yes, I'm here. I'm safe because of you. Your father would be grateful, would be proud of you both. Thaddeus's hand relaxed in hers. I'm very tired. Then sleep. I'll stay with you. The bitter tonic. Morrow said I must drink it. In the morning. Rest now. But even as sleep began to claim him, he murmured fragments of memory. Stories of her father as a young lieutenant, quick with jokes and quicker with courage. The time they'd stolen a colonel's horse as a prank and spent a week in the stockade. The night before Balaclava, when James had written a letter to Catherine and asked Thaddeus to deliver it if he fell. He was the best of us, Thaddeus said, his voice fading. The only truly good man I ever knew. And I failed him. Failed to save him. Failed to protect what he loved most. You didn't fail, Millicent said firmly. You're here. You married me when no one else would protect me. You fought Agatha even when you were dying. That's not failure. That's love. The word hung in the air between them, unexpected and true. Not romantic love, but something deeper. The love of chosen family, of promises kept across decades and beyond death. Thaddeus's breathing finally steadied into the rhythm of genuine sleep. The fever hadn't broken, but it had ceased its violent peak. Millicent continued to bathe his forehead, to monitor his pulse, to whisper reassurances when he stirred. Dr. Morrow appeared in the doorway near dawn, carrying fresh supplies. He took in the scene, Millicent still in her chair, shadows under her eyes, her hand clasped around Thaddeus's, and nodded with professional approval. The crisis point, he said quietly. If he survives the next 12 hours, he'll survive the relapse entirely. You should rest, Your Grace. I'll rest when he's stable. Stubborn, like your father, I suspect. Millicent looked up sharply. You knew him? Briefly, at a medical conference in London, years ago. He attended a lecture I gave on battlefield medicine, introduced himself afterward. Said his closest friend suffered from what I now know was diabetes. Asked if I had any insights. Dr. Morrow smiled sadly. I had none to offer then. I was still learning. But I remembered him, his fierce loyalty, his determination to save someone he loved. I see that same determination in you. As the gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, Thaddeus stirred again. This time, when his eyes opened, they were clear, present, recognizing her without confusion. You stayed, he said, his voice a rusty whisper. Where else would I be? Sleeping, eating, living your life as a young woman should. I'm living my life as a duchess should, fighting for her family. He managed a weak smile. Your father raised you well. My father and his best friend, Millicent corrected. Between the two of you, I never stood a chance of being ordinary. Thaddeus's eyes drifted closed again, but this time it was peaceful, healing sleep rather than fever dream delirium. Millicent finally allowed herself to lean back in the chair, exhaustion washing over her in waves. She had bridged past and present, held the space between memory and reality, and kept Thaddeus tethered to life when he would have slipped away into the comfort of old ghosts. The long night was ending, and they had both survived it. The courtroom in the county seat was a testament to English justice. All dark wood paneling, high windows that admitted light but not warmth, and a pervasive smell of old paper and older prejudices. Millicent sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap with deceptive calm, while beside her, Thaddeus occupied a chair specially brought for his comfort. He had insisted on attending despite Dr. Marrow's strenuous objections, and indeed, the journey from Ravensford had left him pale and drawn. But his eyes were clear, and that was what mattered. Across the aisle, Aunt Agatha held court among a collection of witnesses she had assembled like ammunition. Dr. Whitmore, the dismissed physician, Mr. Percival Crofton and his pinch-faced sister Letitia, and a handful of society matrons whose main qualification seemed to be an enthusiasm for scandal. They whispered behind gloved hands, their gazes flickering between Millicent and Thaddeus with barely concealed anticipation. Judge Caldwell entered, a formidable man in his 60s whose reputation for fairness was matched only by his reputation for impatience with frivolous litigation. He settled into his chair with a grunt and surveyed the packed courtroom with evident displeasure. "This is a competency hearing regarding His Grace, Thaddeus Edward Crofton, Duke of Ravensford," he announced. "Lady Agatha Harrow has petitioned the court to declare the Duke mentally incompetent and to invalidate a will executed 3 weeks ago on grounds of undue influence. Lady Agatha, present your case." Agatha's solicitor rose, a sleek man named Pemberton, who moved with the oiled confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the Duke of Ravensford, in the final stages of a wasting illness, was manipulated by his young bride into disinheriting his legitimate relatives in favor of a girl he had known for mere days. Furthermore, we will show that the Duchess has isolated the Duke from proper medical care, subjecting him to dangerous experimental treatments that have only hastened his decline." He called Dr. Whitmore first. The physician took the stand with an air of wounded dignity, testifying that he had treated the Duke for 2 years with established medical protocols, only to be dismissed without cause by an inexperienced girl playing at being a healer. "And in your professional opinion, Dr. Whitmore, what was the Duke's mental state when you last examined him?" Pemberton asked. "Severely compromised," Whitmore replied. The diabetes had progressed to the point of affecting his cognitive functions. He was often confused, disoriented, hardly in a state to make sound, legal decisions. And yet, he executed a new will just days after marrying the current Duchess? Precisely. I can only conclude he was influenced by someone who understood how to exploit his weakened condition. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Millicent felt Thaddeus tense beside her. But their solicitor, Mr. Davies, her father's old friend, placed a restraining hand on his arm. Pemberton continued through his witnesses. Percival Crofton testified about the Duke's isolation, how he had been prevented from seeing family during his illness. Lady Winterly, one of Agatha's society friends, spoke tearfully about how shocking it was to see such a young girl married to a dying man, clearly a fortune hunter. Then Agatha herself took the stand. She had dressed for the occasion in somber gray, her face arranged in an expression of pained concern. She spoke of her worries for her niece, her attempts to ensure Millicent received proper guidance, her shock at discovering the marriage. I only want what's best for dear Millicent, she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. She's been through so much, losing her parents, being thrust into a situation beyond her understanding. I fear she's been manipulated as much as the poor Duke, used by opportunists who saw a chance to control a great estate. And the Duke's treatment under Dr. Marrow? Pemberton prompted. Barbaric, Agatha said firmly. Starving a sick man, denying him bread and proper English food, filling him with foreign potions. I've seen him with my own eyes. He's wasting away to nothing. It's tantamount to murder. When Mr. Davies rose for cross-examination, his tone was deceptively gentle. Lady Agatha, you mentioned your concern for your niece. When did you last provide financial support for Miss Harrow before her marriage? Agatha blinked. I provided room and board. Yes, in exchange for her serving as an unpaid companion and household drudge, according to testimony from your former servants. But actual financial support? An allowance, perhaps? New dresses? Educational opportunities? I had limited means. Indeed, because of gambling debts that consumed not only your own inheritance, but also the trust fund left to Miss Harrow by her parents. Isn't that correct? Pemberton leapt to his feet. Objection! Lady Agatha's finances are not on trial here. They are when they provide motive for her actions, Davies countered. Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Lady Agatha attempted to sell her niece to a debt collector before the Duke intervened. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Lady Agatha. The mask of concern slipped. My financial situation is my own business. Including the letters from creditors threatening legal action, the meetings with Mr. Grimsby, a known debt collector, regarding your niece's placement? Agatha's face flushed crimson. I was exploring options for her future. You were selling her like chattel to satisfy your debts. The Duke discovered this and intervened with an offer of marriage to protect her. Is that not the truth? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Caldwell's gavel cracked like thunder. Order! Davies pressed his advantage. You claim concern for the Duke's welfare, yet you intercepted his medical correspondence for months, preventing him from consulting specialists who might have helped him. Why? I did no such thing. I have the letters, Your Honor, all forwarded through Lady Agatha's London solicitor, none delivered to Ravensford until after the marriage. Davies presented a sheaf of documents. Letters from physicians, medical societies, even Dr. Marrow himself, all blocked by Lady Agatha. Why would a concerned relative prevent a dying man from seeking the best possible care? Agatha had no answer. She stepped down from the witness box with her composure in tatters. Then Davies called Dr. Marrow. The physician presented his credentials with quiet authority. Trained at Edinburgh and the Sorbonne, published extensively on metabolic diseases, consulted by aristocratic families across Europe. He explained the science of diabetes with clarity that made even Judge Caldwell lean forward with interest. The treatment protocol the Duchess implemented is based on the most current medical research, Dr. Marrow testified. Eliminating carbohydrates and using specific botanicals to regulate blood glucose. It is not starvation. It is precision nutrition designed to address the root cause of the disease, rather than merely treating symptoms. And the Duke's response to this treatment? Dr. Marrow pulled out a leather-bound journal filled with meticulous notes. When I first examined the Duke, his blood glucose was dangerously elevated. His organs were beginning to fail, and his life expectancy was measured in days. After 3 weeks of treatment, his glucose levels have normalized, his cognitive function has returned to full capacity, and his physical strength, while still compromised, is improving steadily. In your professional opinion, is the Duke mentally competent? Absolutely. More competent now than he has been in months, perhaps years. Finally, Davies called Thaddeus himself. The Duke stood with visible effort, using his walking stick for support as he made his way to the witness box. The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on his slow progress. When he finally settled into the chair, he looked directly at Judge Caldwell. "Your Grace," the judge said, his tone respectful, "I must ask you plainly, did you execute your most recent will of your own free choice and sound mind?" "I did," Thaddeus replied, his voice steady. "I married Miss Harrow to protect her from exploitation by Lady Agatha and others who saw her as a commodity. I changed my will because she is the only person I trust to preserve my family's legacy and honor the memory of her father, who was my dearest friend." "And the medical treatment Dr. Morrow has prescribed?" "Has saved my life. I was dying under Dr. Whitmore's care. My wife fought for me when I could not fight for myself. She enforced a difficult regimen with dedication and compassion. I am here today because of her, not in spite of her." He turned to look at Agatha, and his gaze was withering. "Lady Agatha does not care whether I live or die. She cares only that I die with a will that benefits her preferred heir. She blocked my medical correspondence because my recovery threatened her plans. And she sold my best friend's daughter like livestock to pay gambling debts. These are not the actions of a concerned relative. They are the actions of a parasite." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Caldwell did not even retire to deliberate. "The petition for incompetency is denied. The will stands as executed. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into Lady Agatha's management of Miss Harrow's inheritance. This hearing is concluded." His gavel fell with finality. Agatha fled the courtroom, Pemberton scrambling after her. Percival and Letitia followed, their expressions murderous. But Millicent barely noticed. She was helping Thaddeus stand, supporting him as they made their way through the crowd of well-wishers who suddenly appeared now that victory was certain. Outside, in the weak autumn sunlight, Thaddeus sagged against the carriage, exhausted but triumphant. "We won," he said, almost wonderingly. "We won," Millicent confirmed. "Now let's get you home before Dr. Morrow has both our heads for overtaxing you." As the carriage rolled toward Ravensford, Thaddeus took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for fighting when I couldn't, for believing I was worth saving." "Always," Millicent replied. "That's what family does." Spring had come to Ravensford with an almost defiant exuberance, as though nature itself celebrated the estate's return to life. The gardens that had languished under years of neglect now bloomed with carefully tended roses, and the windows that had been shuttered against a dying man's sensitivity to light stood open to admit the soft May evening. Inside the Duchess's chambers, Millicent stood before a cheval mirror while Mrs. Brennan made final adjustments to her gown. It was silk the color of champagne, cut in the latest fashion with delicate beading that caught the lamplight. Her dark hair had been arranged in an elegant coiffure that made her look every inch the Duchess she had become. "You look beautiful, Your Grace," Mrs. Brennan said, her eyes misting with maternal pride. "Like a princess from a storybook." Millicent barely recognized herself. 6 months ago, she had been an orphan in a borrowed wedding dress, married to a dying man in a chapel that smelled of funeral flowers. Now she was the Duchess of Ravensford, preparing to attend her first London ball, and the transformation felt almost dreamlike in its improbability. A knock at the door announced Grimshaw. "His Grace requests the honor of escorting you downstairs, Your Grace. The carriage is ready." Millicent descended to find Thaddeus waiting in the entrance hall, and the sight of him stole her breath. He stood without his walking stick, his posture erect, dressed in formal evening clothes that had been tailored to fit his restored frame. The past 6 months had worked a transformation that still amazed everyone who witnessed it. The gaunt, yellow-tinged specter who had shuffled down the aisle was gone, replaced by a man who, while still lean and bearing the marks of his ordeal, radiated quiet vitality. His hair had been trimmed and silvered handsomely at the temples. His eyes, once rheumy and confused, were sharp and warm. "My dear Duchess," he said, offering his arm with a slight bow. "You are breathtaking." "And you are standing without support?" Millicent replied, accepting his arm. "Dr. Morrow will be insufferable with pride." "Dr. Morrow has already been insufferable with pride. He's writing a paper about my case for the Lancet. Apparently, I'm to be immortalized as Patient D, a case study in metabolic intervention and diabetic reversal." They walked to the carriage together, Thaddeus's gait steady, if still slightly careful. The journey to London took 3 hours, during which they reviewed the evening's strategic objectives. This ball, hosted by the Duke and Duchess of Pemberton, would be Millicent's formal introduction to society as the Duchess of Ravensford. It would also be the first time many members of the ton had seen Thaddeus since his marriage. The first time they would witness his recovery and be forced to revise their assumptions about fortune hunters and deathbed schemes. "They'll stare," Thaddeus warned. "They'll whisper behind their fans about the dying Duke who inconveniently survived, about the child bride who somehow orchestrated a medical miracle." "Let them stare," Millicent said. "Let them whisper. We know the truth." "And what truth is that?" "That we saved each other." The Pemberton ball was already in full swing when they arrived, the townhouse blazing with light and music. A liveried footman announced them at the entrance to the ballroom. His Grace the Duke of Ravensford, and Her Grace the Duchess of Ravensford. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Fans paused in mid-flutter, every eye in the room fixed on the couple descending the stairs, the Duke who was supposed to be dead or dying, and the girl who was supposed to be a scheming fortune hunter. Thaddeus walked Millicent into the ballroom with perfect composure, his hand steady on her arm, his bearing that of a man who had faced death and found it wanting. Millicent matched his dignity step for step, her head high, refusing to be cowed by the stares. The Duchess of Pemberton, their hostess, recovered first. She swept forward with a warm smile, embracing Millicent with genuine affection. "My dear Duchess, what a pleasure to finally meet you properly. And Thaddeus, you look positively rejuvenated. The country air must agree with you." "The country air and my wife's nursing," Thaddeus replied. "I owe her my life." "How extraordinary," Lady Pemberton said, her keen eyes missing nothing. "You must tell me all about it. But first, let me introduce you to some people who are simply dying to make your acquaintance." What followed was a careful ballet of social warfare. Lady Pemberton, who had been a friend of Thaddeus's mother, guided them through the crowd with strategic precision. She introduced Millicent to the leading ladies of society, each introduction a subtle endorsement that carried more weight than any legal judgment. But the vultures were present too. Millicent saw Percival Crofton lurking near the refreshment table, his expression sour as he watched his lost inheritance dancing with a young debutante. Miss Letitia stood with a cluster of older women, their faces pinched with disapproval. And then, near the terrace doors, resplendent in purple silk and dripping with borrowed jewels, stood Aunt Agatha. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Agatha's expression flickered through a dozen emotions: rage, humiliation, calculation, before settling on a mask of cool indifference. She raised her glass in a mocking salute. "She has nerve, attending tonight," Millicent murmured. "She has debts," Thaddeus corrected. No doubt she's here hunting for her next victim. The judge's investigation recovered some of your inheritance, but not enough to satisfy her creditors. She's desperate." As if summoned by their attention, Agatha began moving through the crowd toward them. Millicent tensed, but Thaddeus's hand on her arm was reassuring. "Your Grace," Agatha said when she reached them, her voice honey-sweet with false warmth. "How wonderful to see you looking so well. And dear Millicent, what a lovely gown. Marriage clearly agrees with you." "It does," Millicent replied evenly, "though I suspect you meant to ensure it would not." Agatha's smile tightened. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I only ever wanted what was best for you." "You wanted what was best for your creditors," Thaddeus said. "Fortunately, Millicent is no longer your concern. She is under my protection now, and she will remain so." "How touching." Agatha's eyes glittered with malice. "Tell me, Your Grace, how long do you think this miraculous recovery will last? Diabetes is a chronic condition. Eventually, the illness will reclaim you, and then where will your little Duchess be?" "Exactly where she is now," Thaddeus replied, "as the Duchess of Ravensford, secure in her position and her future. My will is ironclad, witnessed by the finest legal minds in England. Even my death, whenever it may come, will not dislodge her." "We shall see," Agatha said. She drifted away into the crowd, leaving a faint scent of desperation and expensive perfume in her wake. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Thaddeus turned to Millicent with a slight bow. "May I have this dance, Your Grace?" "Can you dance?" Millicent asked, genuinely concerned. Dr. Morrow says many things, most of them designed to keep me wrapped in cotton wool. I am asking my wife to dance with me at her first ball. Surely that's worth a small risk." Millicent placed her hand in his, and they moved on to the dance floor. Thaddeus's steps were measured but sure, his leading confident despite months away from any ballroom. They moved together with surprising grace, and Millicent felt the eyes of the ton upon them, not with pity or scandal now, but with something approaching awe. "They're watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch," Thaddeus replied. "Let them see what determination and devotion can accomplish. Let them see that we are not a scandal or a tragedy, but a triumph." As they turned across the polished floor, Millicent caught glimpses of faces in the crowd. Some showed admiration, others envy, still others simple curiosity. But nowhere did she see the pity that had marked her wedding day, the vulture-like anticipation of imminent death and inheritance disputes. The music swelled, and Thaddeus pulled her slightly closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Your father would be so proud of you. You know that, don't you? He would see what you've become and know that every sacrifice he made was worthwhile." Millicent's eyes burned with unshed tears. "He would be proud of us both, of the friendship that survived everything, even death." "Not just survived," Thaddeus corrected. "Transformed. You came to Ravensford as my best friend's daughter, a duty to be discharged. You have become my family, my partner, my salvation. I could not have asked for a better heir to the Crofton legacy." The waltz ended, and the ballroom erupted in polite applause. But as Thaddeus led Millicent from the floor, she knew the applause was for more than their dancing. It was acknowledgement of their victory over illness, over greed, over every force that had conspired to destroy them. They had won not just the legal battles or the medical crisis, but something far more valuable. They had proven that family was not merely blood, but choice. That loyalty could transcend death. that a pact made between friends in the Crimean snow could bloom, decades later, into a partnership that restored honor to a noble name. As the evening continued, Millicent danced with other partners, conversed with duchesses and countesses, and navigated the complex social waters of London society. But her eyes kept finding Thaddeus across the room, and his kept finding hers. Two souls who had saved each other, bound not by romance, but by something deeper and more enduring. Late in the evening, as they prepared to depart, Lady Pemberton embraced Millicent once more. "You have done something remarkable, my dear," she said. "Not just saving the Duke's life, but restoring the Ravensford name. That takes more than medical knowledge. It takes courage." "It takes family," Millicent replied, "and I am blessed to have found mine." The carriage ride back to Ravensford was quiet, both of them exhausted but content. Thaddeus dozed against the cushions, his breathing steady and peaceful. Millicent watched the countryside roll past in the moonlight and allowed herself, finally, to believe in their future. They had survived the transaction, the crisis, the legal battle, and the long night. Now, together, they would build something new, a legacy not of illness and death, but of resilience and devotion. The Duke of Ravensford and his Duchess, bound by a promise made long ago and kept against all odds. The pact had been honored, the family restored, and the future, at last, was theirs to claim. If this story moved you, if Millicent and Thaddeus earned your respect, then please, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button to honor their fight. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest, because your words fuel the next story. And subscribe, because I refuse to believe you're okay with never knowing what happens to characters like these again. You stayed with Millicent through hell and healing. Stay with this channel for the next story. You won't regret it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about stories that matter. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.